Now a man arrested and charged with assault following the death of a man whose body was discovered on a subway platform at Penn Station. A 55-year-old man was found unconscious and unresponsive yesterday evening in the area for the C and E trains. Sources say there was evidence the man had been attacked. Police charged 21-year-old Nasadir Tate with assault.
I know you'll like to watch the full story, but please try and go back and click the subscribe button to this channel, and please don't forget to like, share, and turn on your notification bell to notify you when I drop any crime scene to this platform, and comment where you're watching from and what time is it over there. Thank you. Let's continue. Go back and subscribe, because this is the only way you can help me grow. Thank you for subscribing. So let's get to the bottom of the case. The man didn't even see it coming. One moment, he was just another face in the crowd, standing quietly on a New York subway platform, waiting for a train like thousands of others do every single day. No warning, no argument, no sign that anything was wrong. And then, he was gone. Pushed. His body dropped from the edge of the platform onto the cold, unforgiving tracks below, just seconds away from where a train could appear at any moment. But what makes this story even more disturbing is what happened next. Because as he struggled to process what had just happened, confused, disoriented, heart racing, he did something almost unbelievable. He pulled out his phone and started recording from the tracks. What he captured in those terrifying moments would later shock investigators, disturb the public, and reveal a chilling truth about the man who pushed him. Up above, on the platform, the attacker didn't run. He didn't panic. He didn't try to hide. Instead, he paced, calmly, back and forth, like nothing had happened. Wearing a red hoodie, moving with a strange, unsettling confidence, as if the chaos he had just created meant nothing at all. And then, before anyone could fully react, it happened again. Another push, another body falling onto the tracks. This time, an 83-year-old man, a veteran, someone who had already lived through war, now fighting for his life in a place he never expected to die. Two strangers, two lives changed forever, all in a matter of seconds. And the most chilling part? They had never met their attacker. They weren't targeted. They weren't followed. They were simply there, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. As panic spread across the platform, bystanders rushed forward, some trying to confront the attacker, others reaching down desperately, stretching their hands toward the men below, trying to pull them back to safety before it was too late. Because in New York, trains don't wait. And down on those tracks, time moves differently. Slower, heavier, more dangerous. Every second feels like a countdown. And for those two men, it had already begun. What kind of person does something like this? Why were these two strangers chosen? And how did a man with a past this dark manage to walk freely until this moment? This isn't just a story about a subway attack. It's a story about randomness, fear, and the terrifying reality that sometimes danger doesn't come with a warning. Sometimes it just pushes you. The platform didn't go silent right away. At first, it was confusion. People froze, not because they didn't care, but because their minds couldn't catch up with what their eyes had just seen. 1 second, everything was normal. The next, the two human beings were down on the tracks, where no one is ever supposed to be. Then the noise came all at once. Shouts, gasps, someone screaming, "Oh my God!" And beneath it all, The low, distant rumble of a train somewhere deep in the tunnel, still out of sight. But coming. Down below, John Rodriguez hit the ground harder than he expected. The impact knocked the air out of his chest, leaving him gasping, his lungs refusing to cooperate. For a few seconds, he couldn't even think. Just the sharp sting of pain, the smell of metal and dust, and the overwhelming realization that he was no longer safe. He was where trains run, where mistakes become fatal. He rolled slightly, trying to push himself up, his hands trembling against the gravel and steel. His ears rang, but through the noise in his head, something else cut through. Movement above. He looked up, and there he was, the man who had pushed him, standing on the platform like nothing had happened. No panic, no urgency, no fear, just pacing, back and forth. John's heart began to pound, not just from the fall, but from something deeper, something instinctive. This wasn't normal. This wasn't someone who snapped in a moment of anger. This was different. This was controlled, deliberate, and for reasons he couldn't explain. Not logic, not safety, not even survival. John reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he unlocked it. Why record? Why now? Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe, deep down, he knew something terrible had just begun, and someone needed to see it. The camera turned on. From the tracks, and the angle was all wrong. The platform looked higher than it should. People hovered at the edge, their faces stretched with shock. Some were shouting. Some were already moving toward him, reaching down, trying to figure out how to help. But John didn't focus on them. His camera locked onto the man in the red hoodie, the suspect, pacing, back and forth, like he was waiting, like he wasn't done. "Hey!" someone shouted from above. "Stay still! We're going to get you out." Another voice. "Is a train coming? Somebody check the tunnel." Panic layered over panic. But before anyone could organize, before anyone could fully process what had already happened, it happened again. A second body dropped. A dull, sickening thud echoed against the tracks. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze in place. And then the realization hit. Another victim, an older man. His body didn't move the way John's had. Where John had struggled, reacted, tried to push himself up, this man lay still for a moment, his limbs stiff, his head at an unnatural angle before slowly shifting. A groan escaped him. Weak, disoriented, 83 years old. A veteran. A man who had survived war, only to be thrown onto subway tracks in his own city. John's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't random anymore. Or maybe it was worse. It was completely random. Up above, chaos erupted. Someone lunged toward the attacker just for a moment. There was a brief scuffle, a flash of movement, bodies colliding. But it ended almost as quickly as it began. The bystander pulled back, hesitation taking over. Because what do you do when someone acts like that? When they don't shout, don't threaten, don't even run? The man in the red hoodie didn't fight hard, didn't react like someone cornered. He just existed in the moment, unbothered. And then he moved again, pacing, like before, as if pushing two human beings onto train tracks was nothing more than a passing thought. Down below, reality hit John all at once. The second man, the tracks, the train. "Sir!" John called out, his voice hoarse. "Sir, can you hear me?" The older man, Richard Williams, made a faint sound. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. Blood began to show near his head, dark against the gray of the tracks. John forced himself up, ignoring the pain shooting through his body. His legs felt unstable, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He moved toward Richard. "Stay with me," he said, his voice shaking. You gotta stay with me, okay? They're gonna get us out." Above them, hands reached down. "Grab on!" someone shouted. "We've got you!" But it wasn't that simple. The platform was high, too high for someone injured, too high for someone disoriented, too high when time was running out. And somewhere in the distance, the rumble grew louder. Someone screamed, "Train!" Panic exploded again. "Get them out! Now!" John looked toward the tunnel. It was still dark, but the sound was unmistakable now. A deep, vibrating roar that traveled through the tracks and into his bones. He turned back to Richard. There was no time to wait, no time to think. He bent down, grabbing under the older man's arms, trying to lift him. But Richard's body was heavy, unresponsive. His legs dragged uselessly, his head lolling slightly as John struggled. "I can't," John gasped. "I can't do this alone." Two men above leaned down further, stretching as far as they could. "Lift him! We'll pull!" John adjusted his grip, his muscles screaming in protest. He forced himself to stand straighter, pushing upward with everything he had left. "Now!" someone yelled. Hands grabbed Richard's arms, pulled. For a moment, it worked. The man's upper body rose, inch by inch, closer to the platform edge. But his legs, they caught, dragged, slipped, and John felt his strength fading. The sound of the train grew louder, closer, closer. A light began to glow faintly in the tunnel. "Come on!" someone screamed. John gritted his teeth, digging deeper than he thought possible. He pushed harder, ignoring the burning in his arms, the instability in his legs. This couldn't be how it ended. Not like this. Not here. With one final effort, the men above managed to pull Richard's upper body over the edge. His torso slid onto the platform, his legs still hanging for a terrifying second before they were yanked up completely. He was out. But John was still down there. "Give me your hand," a voice shouted. He looked up, disoriented, the world spinning slightly. Hands reached for him. The train's light was now visible, bright, blinding, too close. He jumped, grabbing onto the outstretched arms, fingers locked around his wrists, pulling with urgency, with desperation. His feet slipped once against the track. Then, again. For a horrifying second, it felt like he wouldn't make it. Like his grip would fail. Like the train would... No. The hands above tightened, pulled harder, and with one final surge, John was lifted over the edge, his body collapsing onto the platform just as the train roared into the station. The force of it rushed past, wind whipping, metal screaming against metal. Too close, far too close. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just stared. At the two men on the ground, at the train, at the space where tragedy had almost sealed itself completely. And then the reality hit. Paramedics, police, sirens, voices overlapping, radios crackling, questions flying from every direction. Are they conscious? What happened? Who pushed them? John lay there, chest rising and falling rapidly, his phone still clutched in his hand, still recording, still capturing everything. Because the man in the red hoodie, he was gone, vanished into the chaos. But what he left behind was more than just two injured men, and he left fear, confusion, and a question that no one on that platform could answer. Why? And somewhere in the city, walking freely among millions of people, That question was still waiting for him. For a few seconds after the train screamed into the station, nobody moved. It was like time had paused, just long enough for everyone to realize how close they had come to witnessing something far worse. Then everything snapped back at once. Call 911. Get help down here now. Stay with them. Don't let them pass out. Voices overlapped, urgent and panicked, as people crowded around the two men lying on the platform. Some stepped back in shock, hands over their mouths. Others dropped to their knees without hesitation, instinct taking over where fear tried to freeze them. John Rodriguez rolled onto his side, coughing hard, his lungs finally pulling in full breaths again. But each inhale burned. His entire body ached, his head spinning, but he was alive. Alive. The word didn't feel real yet. He turned his head slowly. Richard Williams lay just a few feet away, and the difference between them was immediately clear. Where John was shaken, Richard was still. Too still. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" a woman's voice said, trembling as she knelt beside him. There was no response. Blood had begun to pool beneath the back of Richard's head, dark and spreading slowly across the concrete. His chest rose faintly, unevenly, like his body was struggling to remember how to breathe. Someone shouted, "Don't move him! Don't move his neck!" Another voice, "He's breathing! He's breathing!" But even that didn't sound reassuring. It sounded desperate. John forced himself up onto one elbow, ignoring the wave of dizziness that hit him instantly. His eyes locked onto Richard. This man. He had tried to save him, even after being pushed, even after everything. And now? "Hey!" John's voice cracked. "Hey, stay with me. You're okay. You're gonna be okay." But the words felt hollow the moment they left his mouth, because nothing about this was okay. Sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, getting closer, louder. The sound cut through the chaos, bringing with it a strange mix of relief and urgency. People parted instinctively, clearing space, waving their arms toward the station entrance as if they could guide help down faster, just by willing it. A man crouched beside John. "Don't move too much, all right? You might be hurt worse than you think." John shook his head weakly. I'm fine. But he wasn't. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his heart still pounded like it was trying to escape his chest. And his mind kept replaying the moment, the push, the fall, the man in the red hoodie, pacing, watching, waiting. John's grip tightened around his phone. The screen was still on, still recording. His camera had captured everything, from the tracks, from his perspective, the suspect, the pacing, the aftermath. Proof. Real, undeniable proof. And suddenly, that felt important. Very important. "Officer!" someone shouted from the stairs. "They're down here!" Heavy footsteps followed. Then more. Then the unmistakable presence of authority pushing through the crowd. "Everybody step back! Give them space!" Two NYPD officers rushed in first, scanning the scene quickly, their eyes moving from John to Richard to the blood to the tracks, piecing it together in seconds. "What happened?" one demanded. "He pushed them," someone yelled from the crowd. "Just shoved them, no reason." "Where is he?" the officer snapped. Silence. People looked around instinctively. But the man in the red hoodie, he was gone, slipped away in the confusion, vanished into the city like nothing had happened. "Damn it!" the officer muttered under his breath, already reaching for his radio. "We've got a suspect fleeing. Male, red hoodie. Possible assault. 2 victims. Get units on it now." More responders flooded in. Paramedics dropped to their knees beside Richard immediately, their movements precise, controlled, urgent. "Elderly male, head trauma," one said quickly. "He's unresponsive. Let's get oxygen on him. Careful. Careful. Stabilize his neck." They worked fast, placing a mask over his face, securing a brace around his neck, checking his pulse, his breathing, his pupils. Everything they did carried weight. Because this wasn't just an injury. This was a life hanging in the balance. Another team moved to John. "Sir, can you hear me?" a paramedic asked, kneeling in front of him. John nodded slowly. "Do you know where you are?" "Subway," he whispered. "Good. Stay with me. We're going to take care of you, all right?" John swallowed, his throat dry. "The man, he's still out there." "We'll handle that," the paramedic said gently. "Right now, we need to focus on you." But John shook his head weakly. "No, you don't understand." He lifted his phone. "I got him." The paramedic paused. What?" "I recorded him when I was down there." For a brief moment, everything seemed to shift. An officer nearby turned sharply. "You what?" John's hand trembled as he held up the phone. "It's all there. His face. What he did?" The officer stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he looked at the screen. And just like that, the case changed. Because now, this wasn't just a random act of violence with a fleeing suspect. Now there was evidence. Clear, immediate, damning. "Get that to us," the officer said, his tone firm but controlled. "That's important." John nodded faintly, his strength fading again as the adrenaline began to wear off. Across the platform, Richard was being carefully lifted onto a stretcher. His body remained limp, unresponsive. The oxygen mask fogged slightly with each shallow breath. "See, let's move," one paramedic said. "We don't have time." They rushed him toward the stairs, urgency in every step. Because somewhere between the platform and the hospital, anything could happen. John watched as they carried Richard away. A man he had never met. A man who had been a stranger just minutes ago. And yet now, their lives were tied together forever. Two victims of the same moment, the same push, the same man. And as the platform slowly began to clear, police taping off sections, witnesses being pulled aside, statements starting to form, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because somewhere out there, walking freely, blending into crowds, possibly looking just like anyone else, was a man who had calmly pushed two strangers toward death. And then, simply, walked away. And the question that haunted everyone who had seen it wasn't just why. It was something far more terrifying. Who would be next? The sirens didn't stop. They echoed long after the platform had been cleared, long after the train had come and gone, long after the crowd began to thin. But the tension they carried stayed behind, hanging in the air like something unfinished. Because it was unfinished. John Rodriguez sat on the back of an ambulance, a thin blanket wrapped loosely around his shoulders. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but his eyes hadn't settled. They kept moving, watching people, watching shadows, watching every passing face as if expecting to see him again. The man in the red hoodie, still out there, still somewhere in the city. "All right, John," a paramedic said gently, crouching in front of him. "We're going to take you in just to be safe. You took a hard fall." John nodded slowly, but his grip tightened around his phone again. "The video," he said quietly. "It's already been sent," an officer nearby replied. You did the right thing. Did the right thing. The words felt strange, because nothing about today felt right. Across the street, another ambulance sped away, this one carrying Richard Williams. No sirens now, just speed, urgency, silence. And inside that vehicle, an 83-year-old man, an Air Force veteran, fought for his life, completely unaware of the chaos he had left behind. Hours passed, then more. By the time the sun began to set over New York City, the story had already started spreading. First locally, then nationally. A random subway attack. 2 victims. 1 suspect. And a video. The footage John recorded didn't take long to reach investigators, and once they saw it, everything accelerated. Because there he was, clear as day. The man in the red hoodie, pacing, unbothered, unhurried, his face visible, his movements distinct. There was no confusion now, no guessing, no searching blindly through crowds. They had him, or at least they knew who they were looking for. "Run it again," one detective said, leaning forward as the video played on a monitor. The room was quiet, focused. Every second of footage mattered. "There," another officer pointed. "Pause it." The screen froze. The suspect's face stared back at them, cold, detached, almost expressionless. "Enhance that," the detective muttered. Keys clicked. Zoom adjusted. And just like that, a name began to form. By the next morning, and the man had an identity. Baron Alexander Posada Hernandez, 34 years old, Honduran national, and not a stranger to law enforcement. "Pull his record," the detective ordered. What came back wasn't surprising, but it was disturbing. A long list of charges: assault, domestic violence, multiple arrests, a pattern, a history, and something else. "He's been deported," an officer said, scanning the file. 4 times. The room went quiet again. 4? Someone repeated. "Yeah, last time was 2020. The detective leaned back slightly, eyes still on the screen. "And now he's here, pushing people onto subway tracks." No one needed to say it out loud, but everyone in that room was thinking the same thing. This could have been stopped. The search didn't take long. Not with a face. Not with a record. Not with the kind of attention this case was getting. Tips started coming in. Calls, messages, sightings. Some false, some useless. But one of them was real. "Brooklyn," the officer said quickly, holding the phone to his ear. "Homeless shelter. Caller says he's seen him there before." The detective didn't hesitate. "Let's move." It was early morning when they arrived, the kind of quiet that only exists before a city fully wakes up. Officers surrounded the building carefully. No sirens, no noise, just controlled movement, because they didn't know what they were walking into. A man capable of pushing strangers onto tracks without hesitation was not someone you took lightly. Inside, the shelter was dim, still. A few people stirred as officers entered, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. "Police," one announced firmly. "We're looking for someone." A photo was shown. Faces glanced at it. Some shook their heads. Others looked away. Until finally, "There," someone whispered. A finger pointed, across the room, near the back, sitting quietly, as if nothing had ever happened, wearing the same calm expression captured in the video. Baron Alexander Posada Hernandez. "Stand up," an officer commanded. The man looked up slowly. No panic, no surprise, just recognition, like he knew this moment was coming. "Put your hands where I can see them." For a brief second, the room held its breath. Then, he complied. slowly, almost casually, as if being arrested was just another part of the day. Cuffs clicked around his wrists. Cold. Final. And just like that, the man who had turned an ordinary subway platform into a scene of chaos was in custody. At the station, the questions began immediately. Why did you do it? Silence. Do you know those men? A shake of the head. No. Then why? Another pause. Longer this time. Then finally, I didn't push anyone, he said. The room stilled. The detective leaned forward slightly. We have video. No response. You were seen, recorded, identified. Still nothing. Just that same expression. Detached, unbothered, like the truth didn't matter. Or maybe like he didn't understand it the same way everyone else did. The charges came quickly. Attempted murder. Assault. Serious. Heavy. The kind that don't disappear. The kind that follow you. But while the legal process began, the real battle was happening somewhere else. In a hospital room. Machines beeped steadily. Soft. Rhythmic. A reminder that life was still there. Still holding on. Richard Williams lay motionless. A ventilator breathing for him, tubes and wires connecting him to everything keeping him alive. His family stood nearby, waiting, hoping, praying. Because this wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about survival. Days passed. Then more. Updates came slowly, carefully, each one carrying weight, critical condition, serious head trauma, unconscious, and then a small change. Movement. Slight. Barely noticeable. But enough. Enough to shift everything. He's responding, a doctor said quietly. Hope. Fragile. But real. John recovered faster. Physically, at least. And the bruises faded. The soreness eased. But the memory, that stayed. The fall. The tracks. The sound of the train. And the image of a man pacing above him like nothing mattered. He replayed it over and over, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stop. The city moved on, as it always does. Trains kept running, platforms filled, people waited, watched, stood near the edge. But something had changed, something subtle, a hesitation, a glance over the shoulder, a step back from the yellow line. Because now, everyone knew. It doesn't take a warning. It doesn't take a reason. Sometimes, it just takes one person, one moment, one push. And in a jail cell, not far from the tracks where it all happened, a man sat quietly, charged, accused, facing the consequences of something he still refused to admit. But the truth didn't need his confession anymore. It had already been seen, captured, remembered, by the people who were there, by the man who survived, by the man still fighting to, and by a city that would never forget how close it came to losing them both.